Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Chris Freemott, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
It is a pleasure to be at the center of the universe, although there's people who know me who think I've always been here based on what I say.
Yeah, it's less an ego thing for this podcast and more about the conversation is me being focused and centered on you. And so you've become the center of the universe for this podcast and for me as my guest. And so I guess we should start with how you and I connected. You and I both have the fortune or pleasure or misfortune of knowing Bill Walker.
Ignominy? Is that maybe a better term?
That's a great. Now, my audience likes 2 syllables and fewer in their words.
So we'll pull back from the polysyllabic approach to tonight's talk. Huh?
One, 2 at most.
That's all right. Walker's already looking it up anyway, wondering what the hell I just said.
Yeah, but I worked with him. He's a Philly guy, and had the pleasure of working with him for a couple of years in Richmond. And how did you guys connect?
Bill was our chief revenue officer at Unison, which is in the real estate industry, similar to debt, but it's equity. And he and I shared an apartment because he commuted from Philly and I commuted from Chicago, and roughly 2.5, 3 weeks a month, we'd be in the condo at the same time. So I was 2 layers below him, and I was on our business development side. So it went myself, then Joe, the gentleman I work for today, and then Bill. But because Bill and I would sit on the couch and watch sports and eat chicken wings, we'd be able to talk shop, and I got, a C-level executive's ear, and we became friends.
Yeah, and he's by all accounts, he's a normal, very bright, worldly guy. But I never had to stay in the same place for 2.5, 3 weeks at a time. Was he a good roommate?
He was a great roommate. I mean, we were working hard. Bill likes to get up early. He was on East Coast time. I was on Central. So he'd generally rise naturally an hour before I would. And he'd get up there and get all of his meetings. But we'd get home around the same time, a little later. We watched a lot of basketball, a lot of baseball, a lot of football, got the evenings through, joined each other in the gym. We had a nice place to live. We enjoyed it. It's a good time.
All right. So you're talking about watching sports. And I have an idea where you would say you're from, but instead of me answering that, where would you say you're from?
Well, I'm from Chicagoland. I've been here since 1983. I follow the Hawks. I support them. I follow the Bulls. I support them. I watch the Bears and I cry. But baseball belongs to the Cardinals.
Now, what is it about baseball and St. Louis that you stuck with them and not maybe stuck with some other sports out of St. Louis? Well, actually, are there any other St. Louis sports teams in town these days?
There used to be. You got the Blues, which have always been great in hockey. But remember, the Rams got driven out by, I can't remember her name. Was it Georgia or something like that?
Yeah.
But baseball and the Cardinals comes from my father. So my dad was an accomplished pitcher, did very well in high school. Didn't quite make the ASU team, but he was there when Rick Monday was there and Reggie Jackson were there, but he was a pitcher. So I grew up playing baseball, pitcher, first baseman, third baseman. And at the time, my father was a Cardinal fan. So his father was a Yankee fan. And being born in 42, he grew up during the great era of the 60s with Gibson on the mound. So he had to counter his father's affiliation for the Yankees with a team at that time that was competitive. So that carried over with me because in the 80s, I was born in 73, Cardinals went to the World Series 3 times. So when you're a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old, it's a lot easier to watch a winner and be supportive of them. And this was really during the dark days of the Chicago Cubs. I mean, you're talking games that, they'd have 1,100 people who would show up at sometimes. Harry was drunk by, third inning. And you really had to be a lovable loser fan at that particular point to follow him. And baseball was kind of one of those things. This is well before the days of cable that allowed my brother and I and my father to kind of bond together because my brother Mark, who's younger than I am, he played baseball. We played catch with dad, good old portion of Americana right there. So, but following a winner was easier than following a loser.
No, it makes a ton of sense. The Cardinals were very, very good to the 3 championship point you just made. The Cubs, I don't know their full history. I know they hadn't won a World Series since 1918, and of course they won one a few years ago. They had almost a century of misery. And
Yeah.
you're right. 40-year-olds have a tough time rooting for a loser. To your 1,100 fans in the stadium point, but yeah, kids, 10-year-old kid, they don't want to follow a loser. You don't get to talk any smack to your friends.
It's right. It's one thing if you grew up in the city and you had a job or a career, or maybe you could sneak out and you could go to the ballpark because you worked in, the north side of Chicago. You could go experience the game. It was really approachable. You could always get a great seat. You could have that intimacy, be inside the bases, if you will, sit behind home plate. I don't know how you get behind a team that had such inept management that they would have truly wonderful loyalty of their fan base if they were successful, which was proven. But the old joke here before they won a couple years ago was that Haley's Comet has passed twice before since the Cubs won a World Series. I literally think Haley's Comet passed like 1 or 2 years after they won their first one, and then you had all those years before. It just comes back every 72 years or something like that. So yeah. But baseball is actually a great sport in the Midwest. A lot of us grew up playing it. A lot of us grew up loving it. I think that you take a look at some of the teams around here: Cubs, the White Sox, the Brewers are great fans. Detroit is full of great fans. St. Louis is great fans. You're generally surrounded by people who understand baseball. And if your fans understand what's going on in the game, the players really react better to that. That's kind of where you get some of this, eternal gratification that kind of feeds on itself. A lot of people get pissy with the Cardinals for playing the Cardinal way. It's just this thing that they picked up on. But I think it means something to a lot of ball players. They tend to be loyal to these hometowns. I think they go to the New Yorks. They got to put up with a lot of fans that are very, very particular. They're very demanding. Philly is the same way. They get paid a lot of money because the metro markets are so big. But I think they're more comfortable playing in the heartland than they are on the coasts.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There's a depth of loyalty that you find in the Midwest that you're just not going to find on the coast typically.
Yeah.
I noticed in your listing of Midwest teams, you didn't mention the Guardians. Do you consider Ohio part of the Midwest?
I do. I don't understand the name change in the Guardians. I think that's a little bit of a wimpish attitude. And I didn't mention Cincinnati because I grew up in the Mars Shot area, and she was kind of a bitch. But hey, you had the Big Red Machine. I mean, you had 3 of the greatest names of all time played on there. Cincinnati probably deserves a little more respect from me, but
yeah,
life.
One of my good friends growing up was a Cincinnati fan. He was super obnoxious, so I've always disliked him because of that. All right, well, since we're on sports, let's pivot to another sport. Let's just get the Bears out of the way. Why are they so bad recently? And I say recently, the last 20 years.
McCaskies.
Yeah, they just don't know how to run a team.
You've got an ownership group that seems to be less interested in producing a dynastic team by drafting properly and putting money where it belongs. And instead, they ride on the coattails of the great 80s teams that we had. Now, that being said, I don't know Georgia. I don't know Mike. Chicago sports are very polarizing when it comes to these opinions of how the ownership should really behave. We have an interesting dynamic that might change the shape of Bears going on right now. And it's them potentially, if not officially, I don't watch local news, to be honest, but their affiliation with Soldier Field and how piss poor the city of Chicago and the Park District has managed Soldier Field has hindered the Bears in many ways with the amount of revenue they can generate, the box seats they can generate, the inability to put under a dome and bring a Super Bowl to Chicago, which could obviously support it from any perspective: airport, hotels, restaurants, right? All those things, we should have a Super Bowl here. And with their potential pivot to moving to Arlington Heights on the old grounds where the racetrack used to be, or still is, it just needs a big yellow truck to take it down. I think the Bears would theoretically be able to rebound because I think they have some bad deals that the city has put in front of them that have locked them into, these multi-decade deals, support a stadium, subsidies, all that stuff. And then they really haven't drafted as well as they probably should have. There have been some long shots that have not panned out. That happens. but they haven't done a great job of backfilling. We had a little bit of a sense of hope recently. Khalil Mack came in. We had a great defense a couple of years ago. We had a nice resurgence, but it fizzles out. We don't really finish the job the way we used to.
And that is, so a lot of teams in the NFL that are perennially not good. And when I say perennially not good, I'm thinking of the Lions, even though they've been playing better the last couple of years. As an example, the Texans, they're a fairly new team, but they've not really done anything. And we can name probably another 6 or 7. My impression of those teams is the owners are in it to participate in profit sharing. And so they'll spend and generally do what they need to do to barely qualify for profit sharing and no more. I don't think that's the Bears, unless you tell me otherwise.
No, I think that's a really, really proper way to look at it. I think the McCaskies love the team. They love the city. They love the fan base. They're not Dan Snyder, right? I think you hold the Redskins or whoever the hell they're called these days. What are they?
Commanders.
They are the Commanders? So I got the Guardians and I got the Commanders, right?
I'm surrounded by Commander paraphernalia down.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
You take a look at what Dan Snyder has done. To your point, that feels like somebody who is literally milking the cow for its last drop and doesn't give a shit about the product that gets put on the field. He's like the same Eddie Lampert, the guy that took out Sears and Kmart. Has just been milking those bonds and whatever the cash flows as those great names. Well, great names in Sears, adequate names in Kmart, but still, they were a multi-billion-dollar business, and just drove him into the ground for his own gratification. I don't think the Bears feel that way. I don't think that I could be wrong. I don't listen to Chicago sports talk radio, but I don't think the general consensus here would be they're just clipping a coupon. I think they want to put a better product on the field. I really believe that. They have one of the greatest legacy brands in all of sports.
Yeah.
You got 4 million people here who would love to turn out and support them if they put a great product on the field.
I mean, Chicago has a reputation, and you live there, for being a rough and tumble town. That, to your point, is super loyal. What better name to have in the team's lore than Dick Butkus at middle linebacker? I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, exactly. Walter Payton at running back.
Yeah.
Mike Singletary at middle linebacker. Urlacher in his heyday was one of the best the game's seen. He's got a gold jacket. Gale Sayers.
Yeah.
Brian Piccolo, if you want to tear up a little bit.
Oh, man, that movie makes me cry every time I
How does it not?
watch it. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, you want to see a better product. I really hope that we are able to move the team to Arlington Heights, and I really hope that it does produce a better football team. I think that the city, I don't know that you want to get into politics. It can be ugly and bad, but Chicago is really run very poorly. And it's being run more and more poorly at a faster and faster rate every year. Losing the Bears, losing that revenue, losing that foot traffic just feels like another nail in the coffin for the city itself. But Chicago is becoming less and less important every single year. The suburbs are, I'm in the suburbs. I'm in the western suburbs. I'm in a town called Naperville. It's very Chicagoan to say, where are you from? And you say Chicago. And somebody who knows the city says, oh, where? Lincoln Park, Ukrainian Village. Like, no, I live in Naperville. Oh, you're from Chicagoland. Right? You ask a New Yorker in the 5 boroughs, where are you from? They're going to tell you Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island, whatever it is. Chicagoans look at Chicago as an identifier for who they are. Only once you get past that introduction does somebody say, oh, yeah, I live out in the suburbs. Bringing the Bears to the suburbs, that's going to be a big body blow to the city of Chicago. And they kind of need that awakening. They need to lose that tax dollar revenue.
Yeah, I think they do. And I don't think Chicago is unique in what I'm about to say, but a lot of the big cities in this country, and New York is its own animal, so I don't necessarily throw New York in there, but I certainly throw LA in there. There's corruption upon corruption, and I think there's this exponential effect that happens when there's been that much corruption for that long. It gets worse at a much faster rate as each year passes.
Nobody has been able to combine corruption with nepotism like Chicago. I mean, this is anecdotal. You can't use it as a stat, but if you were to look at like the state level or the city level or the county level, you take any state but Illinois, and let's say that there's 200 unions, teachers, janitors, whatever they may be, bus drivers, police officers, firemen. I think Chicago, because we're so fractured and so corrupt, we have something along the lines of 10,000 unions.
Doesn't make any sense.
And it's all because of nepotism and favoritism, the way Mayor Daley started out the machine, as it's referred to here locally as the machine. Now, ironically, we've had some big names, Mike Madigan, Ed Verdoliak, and some of the other old guard are finally looking to be put under pressure by the feds. And we hope that it's a sign of putting sunlight as a disinfectant on what we all know exists. But they just got too greedy. The aldermen of Chicago are, holy shit, are they notorious. I mean, all of them is a really unfair statement to many of them. But those that are corrupt, they are staggeringly corrupt.
So the term alderman is not something that I'm super familiar with. Is that essentially like saying city council person?
It is. Think of Chicago if you were to divide it up like a pizza and every slice was a ward. Chicago has wards, and those wards elect aldermen, and they are your local representation, almost like your state or city congressmen. And they are the ones that run the city of Chicago based upon their own little precinct and fiefdom. And inside each of those wards, you start to develop your own need for your own supportive roster of people, right? And that's where you start to develop these make work programs. And these wards are jockeying for state dollars and local dollars and federal dollars to improve their ward. And that's when brown bags and favoritism comes into play.
Say more about brown bags.
What's that?
Say more about brown bags. I'm not familiar with that reference.
Bags of cash.
Ah, yeah, sorry.
The
I'm a little
bribe.
uptake. I live here in a place where I'm sure that happens, but it's not something that's super common, or maybe it is common, but it's not known.
It's overt. I think in politics, you kind of have to assume at this point that the fix is in at some level, right? Whether it's, insider trading at our congressional level, where people have made a lot of money knowing what the government's going to do, to the overt, legitimate, on-camera, Chicago aldermanic way of literally taking a bribe in cash on tape, being caught red-handed and saying, why is this a big deal?
It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. It's awful. It's horrible.
So why did you cut? Well, I probably have a decent idea of what this answer is, but I'm always fascinated by, especially big cities. Why did Chicago become a place people flock to in the first place?
Look at where the location is. It's the quickest path via rail that allows you to connect the West Coast and the East Coast. And when we were able to reverse the flow of the Chicago River, which used to flow into Lake Michigan and led to multiple cholera outbreaks, we reversed the flow, which is a wonderful feat of engineering. And the Chicago River now flows into the Mississippi. So if you think about it from a geographic perspective, you can have ships enter at the St. Lawrence Seaway up in Canada and New York, come all the way through the Great Lakes, and then exit into the Mississippi River and the Gulf. So Chicago became one of the greatest hubs for both heavy metals. Think, God bless him, he just passed us, Gordon Lightfoot and the Edmund Fitzgerald, the iron ore coming out of Canada and Michigan. You would bring heavy metals into the steel foundries of Gary, Indiana, and Chicago. You would bring, and it used to be called the hog butcher to the world. We had some of the largest stockyards I think the country has ever had, because you could butcher animals and move them across the country on both rail and water, and do so very effectively. So you had a relatively temperate climate. All of those things came together to make Chicago what it was. And then as we moved into the 50s and air travel became more critical, O'Hare Airport is fantastically situated if you're going to travel the country. And the last but not least, as heavy industry began getting its feet underneath it, because we're so close proximity to Detroit and the automobile and manufacturing areas, Chicago became one of the feeder cities for tool and die guys, as well as the plastics industry, because you move plastics in mass on rail and in boat. So you had a confluence of events that really came into play here that grew the city itself. We diversified. We brought in finance. We brought in retail. I mean, at one point, I think Allstate was here. So you had insurance. You've got medical with Baxter and AbbVie. You have a very diverse workforce here, or had. I think the last 20 years, our politics have driven away a lot of that corporate headquarters. Illinois, right up there with anybody else right now. We drove 100,000 net population out last year with bad policies. But Chicago's growth came because of the water and the rail.
So I'm ashamed to say this. I'm in my mid-50s. I didn't realize they had reversed the direction of the Chicago River. I had no idea.
Yeah, if you ever get to Chicago, one of the things that people always say, hey, what do I do when I get there? I'm like, I don't know, go to a fucking Cubs game, order a pizza. Right. But what you really ought to do if you're ever here is go take one of the Chicago architectural tours on the river, because it's got tremendous architecture. Mies van der Rohe. You've got the gentleman that built the WGN building, and you got the NBC Tower. You obviously have the Sears Tower, or Willis Tower, I think as it's called today. It'll always be Sears to those of us who grew up here. But you can get an unbelievable sense of Chicago's history by way of water. And you got to remember, Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocked down the lantern and wiped out most of the city, which is why we have Water Tower Place, which is the last place that was left standing after the Great Fire. And we rebuilt Chicago, so it was relatively modern from that perspective. But yes, the reversal of the Chicago River was a critical component of keeping our citizenry healthy, because of your capacity to move the sewage downstream as opposed into your drinking water.
Is there a documentary or several out there about the Chicago River and what they did there?
I'm sure there are. That feels to me like that would be on one of those modern Marvel type shows on the Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
I mean, I could look it up and send you an email for your
No, I can Google it.
It is definitely one of those things that people should know more about. It's a true engineering feat.
It sounds amazing. You referenced the Great Fire. I mean, that's where the Second City moniker comes from for Chicago, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's like the younger sibling to New York, which doesn't really make any sense. Like, how would that have happened? It's because of the fire. But I swear, a lot of people on the East Coast think that that's where the nickname comes from.
And you know what? Quite frankly, from probably 1900 all the way to today, Chicago, God, maybe if you were to call a second city in the country from that perspective as a New Yorker, it was probably Chicago for a long, long time. And then LA probably took us over. But yeah, you are correct. My understanding is it's from the rebuild.
Yeah, I guess if you go back 250 years back to a Bill Walker reference, Philly might have been the second city. Who knows?
Philadelphians are unique people. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I've had a few Philadelphians on this podcast, and every time I ask them about the city of brotherly love and ask them where that name comes from, they try to give me a legitimate answer. And I'm sure there's a wonderful history that I wasn't paying attention when they explained it, because their fans are unbelievable. Now, I've been to a Giants game. I've been to a bunch of Commanders or Redskins games. I've been to a few Eagles games. I name a handful of other franchises. Eagles. I've never been to a Bears game in Chicago. I've seen them play in the Meadowlands.
Really?
Yeah, I've never been to a game at Soldier Field. Are the fans as crazy as Philly fans? Because Philly fans are out of their minds.
No one's as crazy as a Philly fan, and that includes. I've even been in, the right field bleachers at Yankee Stadium where they have the bleacher creatures. Philadelphia is nothing but bleacher creatures. I mean, aren't you guys the ones who threw batteries at referees?
They threw bottles at Santa.
Yeah, I mean, good Lord. Nobody's like the Philadelphia fans. You don't look, I'm sure it happens, but I don't think that you get the same level of alcohol-induced passionate violence at Chicago sporting events that you might in either Philly or New York.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'd love to come to a game at Soldier Field just to experience it. And I'd love to come there when they have a competitive team. And I think they're probably a couple seasons away from being competitive. I think they're actually, to your point, trying to be good again.
I do, and I think if you look at their most recent draft, they did a great job. I think the Bears ranked relatively high on who they picked and how they're trying to fortify their team. So I will tell you, like most of us that live in these 4 climate areas, if you ever get a chance to go to a Chicago Bears game on a Sunday afternoon when it's 66 degrees and sunny, it's really hard to beat that environment here. You know, the humidity is blown out by that time of year. We got that cool, crisp fall air. Skies are bright and blue. I'd like to say that generally Chicagoans are very friendly. You know, it's one of those towns where you see somebody looking at a map and they're looking at a road. A Chicagoan will generally stop and say, "Do you need some help?" Now, depending on what neighborhood you're in, they say, "Do you need some help?" and give me your wallet. But that's a different problem. But yeah, I love being a Chicagoan, but my time here is probably measured in the months right now. My son gets out of school. He'll graduate from high school June of next year. And depending on where he wants to go, the old man's probably putting the for sale sign in the yard. I got to get out of here.
Yeah, by the way, I did not mean to be offensive when I said rough and tumble earlier, because I know
No.
Wonderful people from Chicago, but it does have a reputation for being a fairly, or if not mostly, blue-collar kind of place.
I think that's very true. I think that's very fair. I think that if you went to a Chicago White Sox game, you would get a very different demographic than you would a Cubs game. The Bears have a tendency to be much more homogenous because there's only one team to root for that's not separated by north side, south side.
Yeah,
right?
That makes a ton of sense.
You know, you get to New York, you've got the Jets and you've got the Giants. You got the Yankees, you have the Mets. You have the opportunity to go ahead and still demographically align with who you think your peer group is. It was called the city of big shoulders, right?
Yeah.
A lot of iron workers, a lot of guys who work with their hands here. It's a big union town. It's a proud town.
10,000 union strong.
Something like that. I'm telling you, it's a bananas number. It is so embarrassing.
All right, I'm not going to bring up the Blackhawks other than to say I know nothing about the NHL, but we can spend a little bit. They've won a few Stanley Cups, right?
They were a blast to watch in the last 10 years, but the last 3 or 4 years, boy, it's been misery on ice.
And that's, I mean, I think like all sports, it kind of ebbs and flows, right? You're not going to stay on top every year.
I'm going to misspeak, and there may be some people who actually watch this who will know much more than I do. But I think that the NHL in general, with revenue sharing, I think the NHL in general has had a hard time allowing teams, and maybe this is part of the plan, but I think it's been very challenging to have a dynastic team, right? Take a look at Brady under the Patriots. Let's call it 10 years of very competitive, or Peyton Manning of the Colts, or whatever you want to look at. I believe that the revenue numbers in hockey alone have changed the dynamics of how they've been able to put together 4, 5, 6, 7-year strings of players. I think that may be true across the entire NHL. The Hawks might be front and center because they're such a proud, established, long-standing franchise that is supposed to be good by, I don't know, momentum alone. But I think that when these rules changed, the Hawks kind of got caught with a lot of these expensive contracts and had to let some of these other guys go. I don't know what they're called a franchise tag. I'm misspeaking here, but I think that really has hindered the Blackhawks.
Yeah, I mean, I follow the NHL playoffs just because I love playoffs in almost any sport. And the names at the top, the ones that end up in the Final Four and playing in the finals, the names tend to change quite a bit the last few years.
Yeah, and look, is that good for the sport? I don't know. Is that bad for the sport? I don't know. I know that going to the United Center and watching a Hawks game is still a lot of fun. It's the kind of place where it gets really rowdy, gets really noisy.
Well, hockey games in general are fantastic in person.
Hockey is definitely one of those games you need to be there to really understand it. I mean, even on these new 4K TVs at 90 inches, you can get at Costco for a bag of ham and $1. That puck is too small. I mean, it needs to be the size of a pizza for me to follow the damn thing.
Yeah.
But when you're in the game, when you're sitting there literally watching it on ice and it's, a couple hundred feet in front of you, It's fantastic. I think basketball's kind of similar in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it's the intimacy does not come through the TV screen.
Well, I tell you what that surprised me. I did not play basketball. I'm tall, but I'm fat and I'm slow. Basketball was not my sport. When I was working with Bill to bring him back up, and we were out in California, it was 2019. I was in the office a little late on a weekend, and I was staying over that weekend instead of flying back to Chicago. It was during the playoffs. The Warriors had a great team. They were going to Game 6 against the Raptors, and my marketing manager, chief marketing officer, came over and she said, "Hey, do you want to go to the game tonight? We just got a call from one of our sponsors. We were buying a lot of TV time and advertising time. They have a couple tickets on will call." I'm like, I got nothing going on. So I went. I didn't realize how much money we'd spent on advertising because the seats I had were amazing. I actually had to step on George Lucas's toe to get to my seat, which I profusely apologized for. But we were probably 5 to 6 columns left of center court, but I was only 7 rows off the court. This is Game 6 of the NBA
Finals.
What I was completely and utterly unaware of, because I do not play basketball, is how amazingly athletic those men are. I have never seen people that large move with such speed and precision in my entire life. NBA players, they have to be amongst the most gifted athletes I've ever laid eyes on.
I would argue that basketball players are the best athletes. And when I say athletes, I'm defining that the ability to run fast, to be quick in the moment, to jump high. But I also mean extreme, to your point around precision, extreme coordination.
Yes.
Of their feet, hand-eye, all of that. And oh, by the way, the average player happens to be 7 or 8 inches taller than the average person.
Right. Yeah. They're 6'5", 245 pounds of pure muscle. Being that close to the court and listening to the guard or whoever would be in charge of calling the play, watching the play unfold and seeing a basketball move across a court at that speed and seeing how fast they could get to the basket, how high they could jump. I was literally blown away. I'm not a big basketball fan. It's one of those things where I think you tend to follow the sports you played as a kid when you get older. You know, it's very easy for me to watch a baseball game and understand strategy because I played it for so many years. It's very easy for me to watch a football game and understand it because I played it for years. I couldn't draw up a play if I had to in basketball or hockey. Or soccer, just games I didn't play. But it gave me a very, very different perspective as to what goes on the NBA court that you cannot possibly capture on a TV. It's impossible.
No, it's a great reminder. Another bucket list thing for me. I need to go to an NBA playoff game, which I've never done.
And if you go, I can't stress this enough, spend the money and get as close to the court as you can if it's going to be one of those things. Don't go sit upstairs. Go see how close you can be to those guys.
Yeah.
They are physical specimens. Tip my hat to them. I could not believe what I saw in my eyes.
Yeah, the only thing that's probably as impressive as looking at an NBA player like that is a left tackle on an NFL team.
Yeah, very large men.
Oh my gosh, it's almost like they're a different species. It doesn't make any sense to me.
They are very large men. I mean, I'm 6'3". I got a 3 handle on me. I got nothing on the left tackle.
Oh, nothing. You have nothing on them. They're 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", and they're 340.
Yeah, and they fill up doorways with their shoulders. They are wider than they're thick. I mean, it's just freaks of nature.
Absolute freaks of nature. All right, so let's round out Chicago sports with the Bulls. I don't think we can talk about the Bulls without talking about the 90s and the 6 championships in the 90s and Michael Jordan and those teams. But have they been good since Jordan retired or since he went back to Washington? They've had decent teams, I guess, a handful of seasons.
They've had a dozen seasons of competitiveness, but they've never had anything that could put together a run. Because I don't play, because I didn't play, and because I don't watch religiously, I don't have a strong foundation or rationalization as to why that is. But this one may be one of those things where you point the finger at ownership.
Mm.
And we go back to the Daniel Snyder type comment as to how many times can you wring the washcloth to make sure all the water's out of it?
Yeah.
Bulls ownership kind of has a high correlation to that from what I read between the lines.
It's almost amazing they were able to put together the teams of the 90s.
It tells you the power of Michael's influence.
Absolutely. So, but you lived in Chicago when all that was happening, or in Chicagoland.
Yep, Chicagoland. Yep.
And I don't think you could live in that part of the country and not realize what amazing accomplishments were happening, especially the second trio of championships after Jordan plays Double-A for the White Sox. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
I have a regret. I took the Jordan years for granted and didn't watch nearly enough games.
No, you didn't play the sport. I get it. I totally get it.
That's right. I mean, it wasn't something that I understood. Obviously, in hindsight, you look at how great he was, and Jesus, he was surrounded by Scottie Pippen and, Dennis Rodman and the other guys that came in. Their names are escaping me, Luke Longley, et cetera, Steve Kerr. If I could go back, I would have spent more time watching the sport to recognize that I was seeing greatness. Just like people who probably live in Boston have been paying attention to Tom Brady, just like people who are golf fans paying attention to Tiger Woods. They were at such a different level than everybody else. I mean, I think Jordan's on record. I don't think this is apocryphal, but somebody asked him recently, last 5 or 10 years, hey, could you guys beat the Lakers? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, by how many points? This is back when LeBron was there and Kobe was there. And he goes, I don't know. It'd be close. Probably by 2 or 4 points a game. Would it be close? And I said, why so close? He goes, well, we're in our 60s. That just little justified swagger there from Michael.
Oh, he gets to own that all day long, and I don't think anybody's going to say anything about it unless you're a Lakers fan.
I certainly hope that quote is actually legitimately attributable to him because it's a great line. But yeah, they were that great. And look, they were playing against Detroit. I mean, Lambeer, guy's kind of a prick, but Lambeer is a hell of a ball player. You had Zeke up there. I mean, one of the greatest point guards of all time, who was overcome by Jordan's greatness. It was a wonderful time to be a Bulls fan. And at that time, the Bears were habitually competitive, right?
Yep.
Then you had the Bulls, and you had the Cubs winning their 13, 14 games a year. So we had and the Hawks would put up a decent team every now and then. So we kind of had better winter sports than we had summer sports for a long run here in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. All right. Let's pivot to something that is true in your life that I am jealous of. You've got a side hustle I don't think does it justice, but you have endeavored to make a living. And I don't think this is top secret, right? This is known by...
No, there's no secret, but I get a kick out of the side hustle and make a living when, this past year was a tax deduction. But go on.
Well, I think you have line of sight to it, you making a living potentially off of this.
I think that's true. Yeah. So I started drinking wine in 2001, a couple months before 9/11. And when you start to drink wine with an interest in it, and I don't mean just to sit down and have a glass of red with dinner, but I mean start to understand terroir and regions and, Napa Valley versus Sonoma, Bordeaux versus Burgundy, that type of stuff. One of the things that comes along with it is food. So I started drinking wine seriously in 2001, began some light collections, but worked my way through to the point where it's about 2012, 2013. It's probably coming up on 10 years now, where I was involved in some of the more popular online chat rooms for wine people. Call us cork dorks if you want. And one thing led to another. I met a gentleman who was an American expat who had retired with his wife to the Beaujolais region of France. He was a capitalist at heart, traded his own book on Wall Street as a stock trader. And One thing led to another, but there are some fine wine glasses that are mouth blown. There's probably about 5 to 10 brands in the world today. And I began reselling them to the people on the wine bulletin boards, just trying to make a market. I'd gone to a wine dinner. Somebody had these glasses on the table. They're very light. They're very elegant. They're beautiful compared to what I had at home. I'm like, holy shit, I would love to replace mine with these. And I looked up the price when I got home, and $60 at the time per glass. I had about 100 glasses in my house because we would do tastings and dinner events. You're talking about a $6,000 or $7,000 nut to crack on crystal. Well, that got vetoed relatively quickly. But what it did is it had me thinking about, well, how do I sell enough of these to other people at a profit that I could then put them in my china cabinet at no cost? That business got to be several $100,000. I was doing a process called gray marketing, which is not illegal, but gray marketing means you're bringing in legal, sanctioned, packaged goods, but you're bypassing whatever your residential distribution channel is that the OEM or the manufacturer established. The brand I was bringing in has some US distributors. They don't like me going past them because I'm eating into their profit margin. One thing led to another, and I had to get out of that business. It's not worth going into on the call because it's painful. But it ended up me meeting a gentleman named Alexander Mack in 2018. I had purchased some of these glasses from Alex, and he had some ideas about his own wine glass. He's a young man. I don't think he's 30 yet. He was just named to Forbes's, up and coming 30 under 30 type thing in the last year. Super bright guy. And we hit it off. And he had put some designs together for 4 glasses under the brand name Grossel, which is a family name. And he'd been working on this for probably 7 to 10 months, maybe even a year before I even met him. So it was just one of those strange bits of happenstance where somebody with a distribution channel, I have a good reputation in the wine glass industry, in my opinion, from what others tell me. So my distribution plus his idea, his access to the foundries and factories in Slovakia, which is where our glass is blown. One thing led to another. Literally over the course of 6 weeks, we agreed to kind of launch a brand. He owns it. I'm just a distributor. I have United States distribution rights, import rights. And, we're having a lot of fun with it. I'm currently not profitable, if you want to look at it that way, because I'm putting money into the business. We invest in marketing ideas. We invest in distribution. I got a warehouse. We ran this thing. A gentleman named Phil Carlson is my GM, my VP, aide de camp, whatever it is. Phil runs the business for me daily. But we were running this out of my 2-car garage up until about a year and a half ago. And we finally moved to a warehouse space. It is a passion. Phil and I have launched our own brand called Vice, which is a stemless glass and a rocks glass. And the Grossel glass is a mouth-blown wine glass. We're going to globally, probably the brand will sell anywhere from 75 to 110,000 glasses. I don't know Alex's exact number, but I have a range. I would say that we are or were the fastest growing mouth-blown glass in the country. I think that Alex has gotten distribution now to probably 20 or 30 countries. The U.S. goes back and forth probably with continental Europe as his largest markets. And, we've had a lot of fun. I wish we'd been more profitable, but I think we will be. It's a lifestyle for me in the long run. I like food. I like wine. I like fine dining. Some of the kindest, most generous, sharing people I've ever met in my entire life come from my wine experiences. I've made some lifelong friends from the wine industry. And hopefully in 5 or 10 years, this will be something I can segue out of banging my head up against the world of fintech and prop tech, which is where I lose my hair today, and segue into a much more, let's call it, romantic lifestyle of travel and fine dining, where the gross revenues get to be written off at Michelin star restaurants because it's for business.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you get to that place. What's better than doing something you enjoy, you're passionate about, and you can pay the tax man and some other folks along the way. might be
That's
like.
right. And it's fun getting my son involved in it. He's 17. He works with us in the warehouse when he can. It's something that he enjoys with me. I'm sure I'm breaking some law, but yeah, he drinks wine at home with me. He's got a good palate. I think it's a lot of fun to go to a winery. It's a lot of fun to meet the winemakers. It's great to experience great food and great wine together. But most importantly, it's actually impossible to have a great bottle of wine if you drink it by yourself.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
have to have that shared with somebody else. You really do. And that's the part that I really like. I think we're all social animals. People who know me know that I kind of tell people, hey, I hate people. Get me away from here. I'm looking for 200 acres and a sniper tower when I get out of here. Just leave me the hell alone. There is an uncomfortable level of truth to that. But the reality of it is, I do like people, and I like people's story. It's fun to hear your story over a bottle or 5 of wine.
What's your so you understand, well, what's the process of evaluating wine? I don't understand any of it. I'm not a wine guy. I'm more of a bourbon guy. I really don't even understand the bourbon world, but I do enjoy a good bourbon.
Well, it depends. Are
how
you drinking? Are you going to be drinking for flavor, or are you going to be drinking for effect?
Ooh, probably for effect.
If you drink for effect, you can separate wine if you want to get down to the brass tacks. Just old world, new world. Okay, old world is going to be Europe mostly, continental, and your climate, your terroir, your techniques, your styles, which are all driven by history and winemaker habits and training. Old world wines tend to be more nuanced and more reserved in alcohol. They try to probably keep their ABVs between 10, 11, 12, 13%. It's becoming harder as you've had some warmer years in a lot of the wine regions. And the warmer it is, the harder it is to keep those alcohol levels low. New World, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, South America, you've got some fantastic areas to grow wine. But for whatever reason, those winemakers have seemed to make their mark on higher octane stuff, big burly Napa cabs, big burly Australian Shiraz. And when you're younger and your liver doesn't hate you, it's easy to absorb those wines. It's easier to drink them. They tend to be very fruity with the ripeness. Americans have a tendency to have a heavy hand with oak. Oak leads to a vanilla type note. Who doesn't like it when your house smells like cookies? Right? Vanilla is an easy flavor to absorb in your palate, makes things soft to drink. I've personally migrated away from the higher octane wines. I love Napa Valley Cabernet. It's very, very distinct, whether you're picking up Rutherford dust or other notes. But I have to drink my Napa Cabs 10, 15 years after they've been bottled. They have to calm down a little bit. When they're young, they are truly untamed Mustangs. They'll just beat the hell out of you. They're a blast to drink, but you remember it the next day because you wonder where the hell that 16.5 ABV truck came from, because they go down really easy.
So are you more of a red wine guy?
I actually drink both. I drink pretty much 50-50. I think white wine gets a bad rap, especially amongst men. It's generally deemed to be a feminine wine, right? Let the women drink their Chardonnay and the men will go drink their cabs. Pro tip, it's a lot harder to make a white wine than it is a red wine. A white wine will show every single flaw that grape has to give you or your technique pulls out of it. But some of the greatest wines of my life have been white wines. And white wine is actually probably easier to drink in the summer. You take what the Spanish and the Greeks and the Italians put out in terms of their very light wines. They're very sippable. They're very light on the palate. They have a lot of acidity, and acidity in wine drives your salivary glands. And that's why a lot of those Mediterranean type wines go great with food. Sometimes they can be hard to drink on their own, but the minute you pair them with food, they're just lovely. White wines can be refreshing. Red wines are generally going to be heavier. They're going to be brooding. They're going to be something that dominates whatever you're going through at that particular time. That's why you can pair a red wine with a steak. All of that fat has to have the body. But man, I got to tell you, there are some white wines out there that will absolutely change your life. And people really should get to know white wines better and set aside any stigma they may have on masculine or feminine or stuff like that.
All right. So if you were going to turn me on to wine, where would you start? Where would I start?
I'd probably ask you what you like to drink normally. You drink bourbon. So do you like spirit? Do you like heat? Do you like the alcohol?
I do.
I'm not sure I understand.
I would probably start you with, let's go find you an Australian Shiraz or a Napa Valley Cab.
Okay.
Those both have a tendency to be higher octane, higher ABV. But at the same time, if you don't have bourbon available, give me your next best drink.
Oh boy, I'm probably going to a good vodka.
And are you going to drink vodka neat or are you going to mix it?
I'm going to mix it.
And what are you going to throw in it? Tonic?
Tonic. I love a good screwdriver. I don't know what it is about orange juice, but
okay.
Yeah.
Then the next thing I'd like you to try would be to try German Riesling.
I've actually had German Riesling and it's fantastic.
And there are some German Rieslings that they will surprise the hell out of you. The Germans, I don't know if you know this, but Germans follow rules.
I was born in Germany, so I know a bit about the place.
That's right. The Germans have a thing called predicate. It talks about how they rank when grapes are picked. It talks about how their sweetness levels are. It's a very, I don't know it off the top of my head, okay, but this is where you hear phrases like Auslese and Trockenbeeren Auslese and all these different things. And you can work your way up the dryness and sweetness ladders. But for people who like mixed drinks, especially since you threw a fruit in there, finding the right German Riesling may be that gateway drug to understanding white wines that you've been looking for. Some of the beautiful things about Riesling is it's got tremendous staying power in the bottle. I've had Rieslings that are 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're still fresh to this day.
Wow.
They can put off this beautiful aromatic petrol-y nose, and then they can wait a couple minutes and you'll be inundated with fresh fruit like white peaches and tangerine and orange and flower blossoms. They can be tremendously aromatic, and then the mouthfeel for a Riesling is generally described as unctuous. It's very round on your mouth. It's very soft. There's nothing harsh about it. You're also not going to get hammered with a lot of alcohol. German Rieslings tend to be in that high single digit to low double digit alcohol level, sometimes as low as 6 to 8%. I mean, there's beers out there that have that kind of a ABV today.
Right.
But I would definitely take somebody and try, hey, sit down with an Aussie Shiraz and then sit down with a German Riesling.
I like it. I'm taking notes.
Wonderful.
All right. Of course, I can play this back too. So back in 2001, when you first started getting into wine, did you ever toy with the notion of running your own vineyard?
No. I think that's one of those romantic dreams that a lot of people have. I mean this respectfully, so don't read anything into it, but winemakers are just farmers. They are exceptionally hardworking people who, the very few of them are the rock stars that have the Aston Martins and the $300 bottle of wine. I mean, as a percentage, winemakers are farmers. They just happen to grow grapes and not corn. And they have the challenge of not only the growing season, but think about this. A guy in Nebraska harvests his corn and he sells it and he goes down to Florida for a couple months, right? A winemaker who's been sweating out how that harvest is, not only now does he harvest his grapes, now he's got to turn them into something that people want to drink 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months later when he goes to bottle it.
Yeah.
They have got tremendous extension risk to their skill set. You're talking about people who truly understand chemistry. as well as agriculture. And they have to be able to look at what their grapes are doing during the fermentation process to successfully pivot and produce a result that is repeatable. Now, you can get a lot of the California winemakers probably get a lot of grief for this, and maybe California is unfair, but that's where I would say it started. That people have tried to turn wine into a formulaic thing. I want to produce the same wine year after year after year. This is where the old world has more of a romantic feel to it, and the quality of the vintage will really drive what's in the bottle at the end. You have areas of the country where they're actually able to use more chemistry to produce the same wine within a much tighter band of variance year after year after year. You go to the old world and you can have vintages of wine, you're like, this wine, it was never hot enough. It never got ripe. I can taste the green in the fruit. I can taste it in the wine. I'm just not going to buy your wine this year. So you have these battles that are going on in winemaking right now, a traditionalist versus a modernist, maybe a way to describe it. So I don't have the skill set or the patience to not only wet nurse my grapes all the way through the growing season, but then I lack the IQ and the capacity to understand the chemistry it takes to see them through their fermentation process.
Yeah, I love the notion that you just described of their part farmer, and a major part of them is farmer. They're also part chemist, and the ones that end up with the $300 bottles and the Aston Martins, they are true artists, perhaps. Maybe sprinkle in some luck for them. But I think about like paintings. There are a lot of beautiful paintings that are only worth $50.
That's right.
And the artists are really, really good, but they're not top 1/10 of 1%.
I had somebody describe it to me this way. I'm not going to tell you if I agree or disagree because I have to sell glasses to these people, right? But are you familiar with an artist named Terry Redlin?
No.
Okay. There are a number of painters that have made their reputation by following a theme. The quintessential Midwestern farmhouse, man with his dog and his Ford F-150 pickup coming in after the duck hunt, that kind of a genre, right? You can tell by the painting if it's a German Shorthair or a Labrador in the background. It's the same product over and over and over again, but somehow they have made a tremendous amount of money changing just enough on the scene to catch the eye of the person who wants to buy it when they can finally afford it.
Mm.
They have produced a scalable, repeatable model that sells at a premium. And there are winemakers out there that have done just that. I'm not here to question how they've approached capitalism. That's up to them and people who buy their product. And some of that product's in my basement. And then there are those who are truly, I will produce what the land gave me this year. And they're not going to do a damn thing other than produce a product within the confines of what their skill set and their raw product has given them. I have unripe grapes. Let me see what I can do with it. I have overripe grapes. Let me see what I can do with it. A lot of Goldilocks going on in the winemaking world, right? You spend your entire career hoping for just right. And that's really hard.
Yeah, I love what you're describing as the traditionalists. I think I would root for them every time.
The traditionalists have a tendency, they went out of fashion for a while. I think they're coming back into fashion rapidly right now. I think they're really, and by the way, the percentages of traditionalist and traditional style winemakers going back 20, 30 years as a percentage of total winemakers was very small. The good ones who followed traditional methods, they were very rare. You've had a huge surge in people who want to study enology, who've gone to the UC Davises of the world, which is one of the best programs out there on winemaking. And they've taken formal education very high-end chemistry and brought it into the winemaking world. And they've really been able to do some tremendous things. Wine quality on average has gone up a lot since I started drinking wine at a serious level. What used to be, to make up a number, 20 wines or labels that you would want to drink or houses, there's probably 100 times that today. And it's because the passion that goes with winemaking has been combined with enough revenue coming into winemaking to allow people to go to school at a higher level and a higher rate to produce better wines on average. It's kind of like bringing quality control and education to a manufacturing process for the first time, because there is a manufacturing component to it. And when you are given a certain product that you have to harvest and then press and then ferment, the broader your scope of knowledge is on the chemistry that goes into that and how to deal with the ups and the downs, and is it too cold? I can't get my fermentation. I'm stuck in mallow, right? All these things that take place. You've got a number of people out there that are now educated on a grand scale globally who know how to deal with that. And I think that the future for people who like to drink wine is good, because it's more and more challenging for a bad wine to gain a foothold. We used to have to accept a tremendous amount of mediocrity, and the mediocrity is no longer really there. You have good and bad, but bad is a lot better than mediocre. A mediocre wine is disappointing. A bad wine is just a wine that they probably didn't have good enough material to actually do anything other than what they did. It's really not the winemaker's fault.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody can throw sugar in wine, but the French don't allow that, for example, within reason. We can have another topic on chaptalization later, but.
Very cool. All right. So when you and I chatted, I don't know, a few weeks ago, we talked about you and I having an appreciation for jacks of all trades. And you love learning. You're a voracious consumer of learnings. And you used a term with me that is, I think, describes a super jack of all trades. And I don't remember the term. What's the term?
Polymath.
Yes. Tell me about that.
A polymath is an individual whose knowledge spans a tremendous number of subjects. They understand complexities. Their knowledge is not, a mile wide and an inch deep. They actually have a tremendous amount of depth and structure to what they know, and they're not laser focused. So yeah, I think in our conversation I talked about, and I am very, very far away from being a polymath. Polymaths are rare, but I view it as one of those things that it's one of those things you should put on a hill and you should strive to become that individual, because it means you're always willing to learn. If you go through life with your head down and you think that, being myopic is the way to see the world, well, let's just hope you're focused on cancer research or, world hunger or something very, very important. But, if you're in charge of running the punch press, it's a pretty miserable life.
Yeah.
Or in charge of accounting at Ford.
No, or accounting for, frankly, anybody.
That's right. I mean, come on. The world is a wonderful place. Never before has access to information been easier than it is today.
We are going to give a plug for Audible. Tell the listening audience what you told me about the Audible program.
Oh, I think that, one of the greatest features that Audible has is their Great Books lecture, which are free. And the Great Books are a series of lectures that are done by the best in class professors in all the universities across the world. So if, Richard Feynman, physics professor, MIT, probably one of the most intelligent people to ever walk the face of the planet. Okay, not just our generation or generation before us, but ever in the history of time. Manhattan Project guy, right? If you want to know physics and you didn't get into MIT, those those series of lectures that you can get access to for, generally speaking, free or a de minimis amount of money, like less than a half off case of Bud Light a month, you are missing out on some of the best things this world has to offer. You need to start listening to the great books and the great courses. It truly is a wonder of the world that much information is deliverable and consumable by anyone with a set of headphones for the price of a decent pizza per month.
It seems ludicrous, right? Think about that just 15 years ago.
It's crazy. I mean, the great courses have been out a long time. I mean, it's the thing you used to be able to check out at your library. You get this stack, like this book. It would be like an atlas, and they all had to be on cassette tapes where you got 32 minutes per side. And this would be 60 hours of lectures by Richard Feynman. And you take home the thing and you never get through it all. But in this day and age of having an earbud in whenever the hell you want and going on a walk and being on a plane and not wanting to make eye contact with the resident sociopath on the subway, you can literally let your brain absorb a tremendous amount of information today via a digital media. And if you're not doing it, I think you're missing out.
I think that's right. I am a busy guy. I have not checked them out yet, but I think now that you've mentioned it twice to me, I have to go check those books out.
Look, I got to admit, some of them are dry. All right. I mean, if you want to know about Gothic architecture, you can find a great course on it. And maybe you got to struggle to get through it. But the world is flatter today than it's ever been. Information travels at the speed of light. What those books allow us to do relatively easily, if you want to put the time in, is to expose yourself to the contextual awareness of what is going on around us on a global scale as opposed to what's going on in our backyard. Mm. The ability to use that type of a knowledge base and education and free information to actually put context around what some talking head on a cable news channel is providing you is more critical today than it's ever been. We are moving away from critical thought into sound bites. We need to be able to take the sound bites and apply them to our own basis of knowledge and understand how to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah,
Great courses can do that.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I think we are becoming weaker and excuse the term, dumber than prior generations. And the irony is the speed of information flow is greater than it's ever been, but I think we may be going the wrong direction as a culture.
Yes, it is unfortunate that it has never been easier to learn, and we've never had a larger population unwilling to gut it out.
Yeah, no, it's well said. All right, Chris, I'm going to do something fun that I do with most of my guests. Apologies up front because this comes out of left field a little bit, but it's meant to be more revealing about you.
Uh-oh.
You're a talk show host. It's your talk show. You can have it at any time of day, but you only get to do this once. Talk show lasts about an hour, hour and a half. You get to talk to 3 people and have a 4th perform. And if you want to interview that act, you can talk to them as well. The one is male, one guest is male, one is female. The act can be a solo musical artist or it can be a group. And then if you're into comedy, think stand-up comedy, but you could also think other forms of comedy. These guests can be alive or dead. Your show can be pure fun. It could be thought-provoking. It could be a mix of those two plus anything else you want it to be. Who are your guests for your one-time only talk show?
So I grew up, I'll do the musical one first. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s, which, depending upon how you look at it, can be good or bad with respect to music. I didn't get to see the band play, but I've seen the lead play live. The Talking Heads on. Because I just missed the capacity to go to the concerts during the great, the Big Suit tour, and it's not making sense. So I love David Byrne. I love his work. I'd probably bring them on. Male. Man, anyone from history, huh?
Anyone from history, anybody alive today. They can be a friend of yours. It can be a family member. It can be somebody famous. And while you're thinking about it, David Byrne is the most creative, bravest musical person I think that's ever been created.
Yeah, guys, great. And I'm assuming I can ignore all language barriers, and we'll assume there's a Babelfish app, and I can communicate regardless of this individual's. Man, I'd love to know what the hell's going through Alexander the Great's brain.
He had a lot going on.
I mean, I think he might not even been 30 and conquered essentially most of the known world, right?
Yeah.
Female.
A lot of my male guests on this podcast struggle to come up with a female guest for this particular question.
And that's unfortunate because there's been a lot of great females in history. I'm trying to think about, the first person that popped to my mind, if you just want the first answer that came up, it'd be Joan of Arc.
Yep.
But I'm wondering, and I don't know the history well enough, where would Cleopatra come in on that? Where would the original Queen Elizabeth I come in? Hell, quite honestly, the hell of a life that Queen Elizabeth II had, right? Hester Prynne would be a hell of an interview.
Who is that?
Hester Prynne's The Scarlet Letter.
That
was the first adulterer back in the day.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it that way in the Americas. But yeah, I think I'll stick with my first call, which is Joan of Arc.
Okay. It's a really good answer. Comedy? Are you a comedy guy at all?
Big comedy guy. I don't know that you can actually interview Robin Williams. Robin Williams interviews you and then takes over the stage.
You can get 4 words out and then he's off.
Yeah, I mean, Christ, you go back and look at his great stuff on Carson show, and you can see he ran with it. Don Rickles would probably. I see myself as having a very similar tone when I want to be a jackass as Rickles. Nobody was as good at doing what Rickles did as he is. I mean, he set the standard for that, whether it was self-deprecating or, quite frankly, insulting humor. But if I have a talk show and I want to talk to somebody and find out what's going on in their head, I think it's pretty hard to not put George Carlin at the top of that list because I found his humor to be cerebral.
Very.
So I'd go with Carlin.
Yeah, Carlin, his thinking became deeper and deeper as he aged, and I wish he'd stuck around a little bit longer than he did. He left us too soon.
Too soon.
Way too soon. Go ahead.
The great ones do, right? It's always too soon.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a great way to think about it.
That's my lineup. So Joan of Arc, George Carlin, Talking Heads, and Alexander the Great.
Yeah, I would definitely check that show out, Chris. I have to go back to Rickles. Him interacting with the Rat Pack back in the day, him interacting with presidents, him and Carson. It's just gold. I could watch Rickles interact for hours.
If you haven't watched, and the Dean Martin roasts are some of the greatest pieces of television that have ever been done. Very few people, I think, our age, we're only a couple years apart, but I don't think gets enough credit. It's Foster Brooks. You familiar with Foster?
Oh yeah.
I mean, the prototypical sound like he's actually schnockered and he's as sober as the day is long. But you go back to this D. Martin roast and you look at the guys who did this, and hell, the women. Lucille Ball, there's a great example of somebody who doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah.
But goddamn, Rickles was great in those roasts.
Yeah, he was always funny. Always
on. Absolutely.
Well, cool. Hey, I'm glad Bill connected us, Chris. I told you
too.
an hour. It's been about an hour 15. I learned.
This has been fun.
Yeah, I learned a ton. I absolutely had fun, and I'm glad you did it, and I appreciate you doing it.
This has been a blast. I appreciate the invite. I'm very humbled by it, and feel free to edit out about 54 minutes of this crap.
No, I'm pretty sure I'm keeping it all in.
Wonderful. Be in touch, sir. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.